Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Eric. Wanted to do a reading report today, so have a couple of books I thought I would talk about. So to pick up from my last update from a week ago or so, I was reading The Lords of Finance by Liaquat Ahamed, which is about the events that led to the Great Depression and from the perspective of the central bankers of the 1920s coming out of the First World War and how they dealt with the financial crisis following the war. I got into some of this last time. And just to talk about the book, like it does give you a good account of the economic challenges after the First World War and how the role that central banking played in all that. The economist John Maynard Keynes is also a main character in this book, as he was an economist who thought outside the box quite a bit and was very critical of the central bankers and their policies, and that becomes a big part of the second half of the book. So overall, this book was useful for learning about the world economy after the First World War. The second half of the book gets a little bit repetitive as we follow country after country going through various economic crises in the 1920s and eventually going into the Great Depression of the 1930s. So if you like economic history and some financial history, this book is written in a really accessible way, and it explains a lot of the economic concepts clearly, banking concepts. Not the most exciting material, but this book, it did win the Pulitzer Prize, and I can see why it did. It did bring this part of history alive in some ways. So that was Lords of Finance. The novel I was reading was The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, which is sort of a fantasy, dark fantasy, realism, some elements of science fiction as well in this book. And I think I was pretty high on it last week when I talked about it. And I liked how the first half of the book I felt was really strong as far as it was blending some realism with occasionally something fantastical would happen. And I liked how the book did that. The second half of the book, I was a little bit disappointed where it moved more into fantasy, and also the story moved into the future. So it really becomes a science fiction book for the second half of the novel. And I don't know, it didn't quite work for me where it becomes a lot of the plot is about evil psychics and good psychics and immortal people and these battles that have going on for centuries, and somehow I felt a disconnect between the second half and the first half of the book. So I still enjoyed parts of it. Maybe if I went back to it again, I would like it more. But yeah, I was just a little slightly disappointed on this book. So yeah, and let's see, to keep going here. The novel I'm reading right now is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This is a book that is set in Russia, mainly during the Russian Revolution and the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. But of course, it's a famous movie by David Lean. But I'm about 100 pages or so into the book, and I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised in a good way when I started to read it, because it wasn't what I expected. I guess I was thinking it would be more of a Tolstoy type of immersive book of these really ornate, detailed set pieces with a lot of characters. But instead, the book, at least the first part of it, it's a lot of vignettes, just a lot of short vignettes. A lot of characters are being introduced. It's almost like a collection of like short films almost, and you get the sense that the narrative, that eventually all these characters and all these short little stories we're getting are going to start to coalesce and interact with each other. So I was Yeah, I thought that was I like that structure. I thought that was kind of very modern, a very modern approach. And I know there's a big history of this book with censorship in the Soviet Union, and that's a whole other story. But right now, I'm just kind of focused on the novel itself. And yeah, so far I'm enjoying the book. So yeah, Dr. Zhivago. I'll mention two other books that I read a bit earlier, probably a month ago or so. This book was on my shelf for a long time. This is Come As You Are, The Story of Nirvana by Michael Azerrad. Azerrad. This is what it was interesting about this book is that it was a book about Nirvana written while they were still a band. So this book was published and released when they were still a functioning band before Kurt Cobain died, and this is a really strong book. It's really well written. It's a really engaging and detailed account, primarily focused on Cobain and his early life, and how his influences and his personality, and how Nirvana, of course, took off in the early 1990s, going from this obscure kind of punk band from Aberdeen, Washington, and becoming just rocketing to success overnight. And it really damaged them. You know, their quick trajectory into fame. And this book, like I said, it's just really well written. It's really detailed. The author spent a lot of time with Kurt Cobain, interviewing him, so you get a sense of his complex personality and what shaped him as a songwriter and what he was trying to do with Nirvana. Really, and how fame is just wow, just what that does to anybody, for them especially, to move from obscurity to fame overnight like that, and such a whiplash. And the book does a good job of that. But yeah, it's just a really detailed and well written book. I've not read books about Nirvana after the fact. You know, we're talking over 30 years ago now. But I tend to like books that are very much of the moment, where the author was present for much of what he's writing about. And like I said, we get a interesting detailed account. You know, you could say in this case the author could be doing PR or propaganda for the band, and I think the author was no doubt a big fan of what Nirvana was doing, but also it's really no holds barred though. I think you really get a lot of gritty details, and if you're interested in this story at this particular time and interesting time in rock history. So I did want to mention this book, Come As You Are, The Story of Nirvana. And kind of along with this book, I've read this book a few times. This is Gen X by Douglas Coupland. This is a novel. It's Generation X, Tales from an Accelerated Culture, which Coupland is a Canadian writer, and this book was published. When was this book published? Okay, in the early 1990s, and it's one of those. It's a book that it's about the experience of Gen X, and there's a lot of disconnected vignettes in this book where characters come and go. The book is really about the fragmentation of culture, the overload of information, kind of like the loss of identity as we move into the 80s and 1990s, and the idea of shaping or creating your own identity, and just how aimless these characters are. You could compare it to, I think it's a lot heavily influenced by beat literature, by Kerouac and writers like that, but it's done in a more streamlined way. It doesn't quite have the idealism or the exuberance of Kerouac and the beats. This is more irony and cultural dissonance and lack of connection and our relationship with mass media. And like I said, there's really not necessarily even a plot to the book, and characters are kind of interchangeable and come and go as well. Like a lot of the ways the characters interact is through their knowledge of pop culture. Like that's the only language left for people is pop culture references, which is, we've seen that in many other stories and films of that time. But that's yeah, this book, it's a fun book to read. You know, it's funny, and it's a book you can just kind of pick up and read pick up at any spot and do it. Like there's also comics in here as well. This was a favorite one of mine. You can see he says, "Oh no, it's finally happened, the blinding flash of light. Phew, it was only lightning." So yeah, it kind of picks up on the lingering Cold War anxieties. There's a lot about language in this book too, about how language was starting to shift in the late 20th century, and in some ways that I don't know. This book doesn't necessarily feel dated. I thought, for me anyway, it did feel pretty current as I was going through it. But yeah, it's just yeah, I enjoyed it. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But reading the Nirvana book kind of led me to reading this book, and yeah, glad I picked it up. Glad I read it. So those are pretty much the books I'm reading and what I have read recently. I did want to talk about. I've been watching the Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution, which came out last year, right? It's a 12-hour film. Of course, if you're familiar with Ken Burns, he's done these long films about American history, the Civil War, or baseball, or jazz. And this was his latest film, although he's working with other people now. About halfway through this film on the American Revolution, and I just wanted to say I think it's really well done. It really presents a complex picture of the American Revolution, where we get the perspectives of many different sides on this, from the British, the American side, divisions within the Americans, the Loyalists, and the Patriots, and different people, Native American perspectives, African American perspectives, the perspectives of women during the American Revolution. So the film does a really good job of really complicating the narrative of the American Revolution from, what we've been taught in movies and school and all this. And so yeah, I haven't read about the Revolution in a long time. I used to have some books on it, but anyway, this film, I just thought I'd mention this film, which is I would recommend it. It's available for free on Kanopy, which if you have a library card, you can access the film for free. For most public libraries offer that service now, I think. But yeah, we hear from historians. We get modern takes from younger and older historians. We get the narration, the primary sources in the film as well. So yeah, and there is, I think, a lot of modern resonance to the film that's worth thinking about. So I just wanted to mention the Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution. So yeah, so that's my update. If you have any thoughts, comments, be great to hear them. But otherwise, I think I'll sign off right now. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Have a good one.